Do you know what makes fantasy readers obsessed with your characters? It is the web of relationships that exists between them. Harry Potter is interesting because of his relationship to Voldemort, Ron, Hermione, Snape, Dumbledore, and the rest of the wizarding world. Ned Stark is interesting because he is an honorable man having to deal with manipulative, ruthless schemers. And if Frodo just walked into Mordor by himself, without Sam and Gollum by his side, it just wouldn't be an interesting story, would it? Having published 4 fantasy novels myself, I've always found that the fire of your story is found in the collision between your characters. So if you want to write insanely compelling character dynamics, I like to follow a 7-step process. And to explain the first step, I want you to imagine this scenario. Let's say you're writing a steampunk murder mystery story. Your detective is stuck on an airship with 7 other characters and someone just died. Right away, you can see there's 2 clear goals for 2 characters here. The detective wants to solve the crime, and the criminal wants to hide the crime. But if those are the only 2 character goals in your story, the other characters are just standing around not doing much, it's going to be boring. Instead, if you look at great mystery writers like Agatha Christie, who, by the way, is the best-selling novelist of all time if you don't count Shakespeare, she has 2 billion total sales, which is utterly insane to imagine. If you look at writers like Agatha Christie, they recognize that you need to give everyone in your story a distinctive goal to pursue. So in our murder mystery example, you might have the wealthy socialite who wants to make sure her reputation isn't tarnished by the scandal, so she's doing everything she can to deflect suspicion. Then you might also have the fame-hungry journalist who senses the story of a lifetime and is determined to uncover secrets, whether they're related to the murder or not, using the investigation essentially as an excuse to dig up personal dirt on all the passengers. Perhaps you also have the victim's husband, who is desperate to inherit his partner's fortune and might even be pushing for a quick end to the investigation so he can get that fortune much faster. Next, you might have the heartbroken lover who had a secret romance with the victim and wants to protect their lover's reputation, even if it means withholding vital information from the detective. Next, you have the ship's medic. Maybe they suspect foul play and they feel compelled to help, but perhaps they've been falsifying medical records to hide past mistakes, and that makes them hesitant to get involved and to reveal their malpractice. Perhaps you also have a nervous stowaway who has a secret of their own they don't want discovered, the fact that they have snuck onto this airship, and this makes them look suspicious even if they are indeed innocent. And then lastly, perhaps you have the detective's assistant, who is someone who really wants to prove their worth by finding the clues first, but that eagerness might actually hinder the main investigation. Now, what can you notice there? Every single character has their own reason for acting in different suspicious ways, and that is going to create a tremendous web of tension, deception, and drama that will keep your readers hooked. And once you've formed a clear goal for every character in your story, this leads to our second principle for writing captivating character dynamics. Make some of these goals incompatible. Broadly speaking, there's 2 types of goals that you can write in your story. Number 1 is a positive sum goal, where it is possible for 2 characters to both get what they want at the same time. Number 2 is a zero-sum goal, where for one character to get what they want, the other character has to lose. Now, both types of those goals are totally valid, but if you want to create maximum suspense in your story, pick zero-sum goals, because tension skyrockets when one character's goal is actively blocking another character from achieving theirs. That right there is the essence of meaningful conflict. Let's go back to our murder mystery example. The detective wants to uncover the truth, but the criminal is determined to cover it up. So right there you have 2 goals that cannot coexist. They are zero-sum goals. For the detective to uncover the truth, the criminal has to fail with their goal. But let's take this a little bit further and layer on some more complications. So if we look at the victim's husband, they want the case closed quickly so that he can inherit his wife's fortune. But the fame-hungry journalist wants the story to be as dramatic as possible, and they're probably pushing for more scandal, more suspects, and more dragging out of the investigation because it's going to help their story. The heartbroken lover wants to keep the victim's secrets safe, but the detective's assistant is probably looking for every bit of information they can find to prove their worth, no matter what it might reveal around the deceased. And then there is the nervous stowaway who is hiding something unrelated to the murder, but fears exposure. So their goal to avoid scrutiny is going to be putting them at odds with the detective and the journalist, who are both digging into every suspicious detail they can find. What you can see here is by making these goals clash, you build a web of obstacles and conflicting interests that keeps every single character on edge. It's not possible for someone to achieve their goal without also stepping on someone else's toes. And that's exactly the kind of energy that keeps readers obsessed and turning the pages of your story. Which leads us to our third step. Differentiate your characters with unique motivations. Strong goals are essential, as I have just explained, but the why behind those goals is equally as important. Because when you give each character in your story a unique motivation, it adds a real depth to their actions, and it just makes their conflicts feel so much more realistic. Different motivations create different dynamics, even when characters seem to have similar or shared goals. So to explain exactly what I mean with this, let's take another look back at our murder mystery example. Perhaps the wealthy socialite wants to avoid scandal to protect her reputation. So she is motivated by pride and fear of public disgrace. But if you look at the victim's husband, on the other hand, he is driven by greed and impatience. He wants the investigation wrapped up quickly, not because he cares about the crime, but because he is eager to inherit his wife's wealth. Then if you look at the heartbroken lover, they want to hide certain facts about the victim because they maybe feel a deep sense of loyalty and love towards the deceased. So they're really motivated by a desire to protect the person's memory, even if it means lying. And then last, if you look at the detective's assistant, they want to prove themselves to their mentor. So they're motivated by ambition and a need for validation and status. When your motivations in your story vary like this, it just gives your characters much more unique perspectives, and it creates really natural misunderstandings between them. Your story is going to feel far more layered and realistic as a result, and as your narrative progresses, you can gradually reveal character motivations to reward the reader, keep them engaged, and give them a sense of progress. Now, if you are finding that a lot of your characters have overly similar motivations and you want to make them feel more unique and more distinctive, then a tool I really like to use is something called the Enneagram. This is a personality typing system that essentially identifies 9 core types of people, each driven by a unique set of fears, desires, and motivations. Now, I talk about the Enneagram and lots of other character development tools in much more detail inside my fantasy outlining bootcamp, but to give an overview, what I find really fascinating about the Enneagram is that you might have several different characters perform the exact same action, but because they have different Enneagram types or different personality types, they may be doing that action for entirely different reasons. And that really helps you to build interesting character dynamics. We'll get into that a bit more later on. But first, I just wanted to mention that if you do want my personal help to develop your characters, then you should absolutely check out my Fantasy Outlining Bootcamp, which, if you're not familiar with it, is my 7-week program where you'll join myself and a small group of fellow fantasy writers to structure your plot, build your characters, and plan your story. I'm halfway through running cohort 4 of the program right now with 10 great writers. I've actually had 3 coaching calls with the writers inside that program today. And one of the things that I love about this bootcamp is how I get to give literally hours of personalized feedback to all the writers I work with to help them build a really compelling cast of characters, and more importantly, to identify and fix the hidden weaknesses that they might not be aware of, but are the main causes that's holding their story back. Just this week, Beth Lindelbauer, who went through cohort 2 of the program about 8 months ago, finished the 3rd draft of the novel that she outlined in the course. Here's what she said after finishing the bootcamp earlier this year.
With this first draft of my fantasy novel, which is supposed to be a trilogy, it's been years that I've been working on it, and I still haven't edited it to the point where I'm satisfied with it. I knew something needed to change with how I was approaching this. So I decided to give this outlining bootcamp a go. Right away, I found areas to improve, scenes to eliminate, but I also found areas that were working really good and still energize and excite me about my story. Jed knows his stuff and he has all the data to back it up, and you ask him a question and he can answer it and bring up examples on the spot. It's really impressive to work with him. I will be rewriting lots of this book, and it's going to be all the stronger for it. And I'm really excited about it.
So Beth, if you're watching this video, I just really wanted to give you a shout out and say congratulations on completing your 3rd draft. I'm really proud of the progress that you've had both in the bootcamp and in the months since then. And if you're watching this and you also want to progress as a writer and overcome the roadblocks that might be holding you back, you can apply for the next cohort of my Fantasy Outlining Bootcamp by going to jedherne.com/outline or by using the link in the description. Okay, so continuing on, once you have developed a strong, unique motivation for each of your characters, the next step to write great character dynamics is to differentiate your characters with unique methods. So at this point, your characters probably have a very strong goal and they have a unique motivation. Now it is time to consider how they actually attempt to achieve those goals. Because even if two characters share similar motivations, ideally their methods should be different. There should be some variation between their methods in order to keep interactions interesting and unpredictable, because different methods are a really useful way to reveal your character's personality, and it might even lead to some moments of tension or cooperation as they approach challenges in a distinctive way. Again, going back to our murder mystery example, the detective is probably going to be relying a lot on logic and very methodical questioning, analyzing every little detail of the case and trying to piece together clues with a certain patience and precision. But the detective's assistant, on the other hand, is someone who's really eager to prove their worth. They might be rushing ahead, jumping to conclusions, or just taking shortcuts that sometimes undermine the investigation. Meanwhile, the wealthy socialite is really intent on protecting her reputation. She might be bribing witnesses or using her influence and her money to try and control the narrative and maybe manipulate others so that she can avoid suspicion. And then if you look at the fame-hungry journalist, they're probably way more confrontational. Maybe they're intimidating people or trying to shame them publicly to force secrets out. And they're wanting to make other characters really defensive to stir up all this additional drama for the journalist's story. Then if you look at the victim's husband, they could be trying to maybe charm or guilt trip people into supporting his particular version of events, using this sort of emotional manipulation to get the case closed quickly so that he can claim the inheritance. When each of your characters use a unique approach to achieve their goals, the result you get is a web of constantly shifting interactions. So characters might be clashing over the methods when they share the same objective because they're using different methods to try to get that thing, or they might be teaming up with people in an unexpected and surprising way when their approaches are actually complementing each other. This variety not only keeps readers engaged, but also reveals different aspects of your character's personalities as they go through and navigate the various conflicts and obstacles in their own particular fashion. So now that you've established distinct methods for each of your characters, let's move on to our fifth step to write captivating character dynamics, which is to have each character respond to your theme in a different way. Your theme is a one-sentence moral argument about how to exist in the world, and it's going to be explored in different ways by all the various characters of your story. I find that the best stories have a well-developed theme that is interwoven throughout every character, plot point, and world-building detail of the book. When you can do that, this provides a great sense of coherence and unity. It makes all the parts of your story feel like they are contributing to a larger, more powerful whole. In the case of our murder mystery example, you might describe the theme as truth matters more than self-preservation. One of the things to mention with theme here is that you can usually tell when you have hit the right theme for your story when you have achieved the following two things. The first one is that it feels like the theme perfectly fits the ideas that you are already exploring. And the analogy here is to imagine sliding the right key into a lock. It just feels like it fits. It feels natural. And then the second aspect is that it feels like your theme unlocks further ideas and development, giving you a deeper understanding of your novel and giving you more inspiration for where to take things from here. So to continue our analogy, that's like the key fitting into the lock. Okay, that's a fit. I then unlock the door and I emerge into the room beyond, and there are fresh ideas and fresh perspectives in there to inspire me. Okay, so you're probably thinking, all right, Jed, you've said the theme is truth matters more than self-preservation. How does that actually shape this murder mystery story? Well, if we take a look at our different characters here, first of all, the detective very much embodies the belief that truth is paramount. For them, uncovering the truth is a matter of principle, even if it endangers their safety or their reputation, because they see truth as a moral duty that cannot be compromised. The detective's assistant, on the other hand, perhaps they start out very much aligned with this view and they're super eager to pursue the truth at all costs. But as the stakes rise and the danger rises in the story, maybe they begin to question whether preserving their own career and safety might sometimes outweigh full honesty. Then if you look at the victim's husband, perhaps he takes the complete opposite stance. He values self-preservation above the truth, and he's willing to lie or even manipulate others if it means that he can secure his inheritance and protect his future. So for him, the truth is expendable if it threatens his interests. Then if you look at the wealthy socialite, perhaps she believes that the truth is quite a flexible and bendy thing, and it really just exists to serve her own needs. So she is more concerned with preserving her own reputation than uncovering facts, and that means that maybe she is willing to somewhat twist the truth if it keeps her in a favorable light. Then the heartbroken lover, well, they're probably quite torn between honoring the victim's memory on one hand by revealing the truth and also protecting certain secrets to preserve the public's image of their loved one. Their inner conflict maybe reflects this sort of nuanced struggle with the theme where they have both a respect for the truth, but they also have this deep instinct for the self-preservation, not just of them personally, but more for their dead lover, because they don't want to maybe reveal that their lover was engaged in an affair. When you give each character a different response to the theme, which is grounded in their personalities and in their goals, what you create is a much deeper layer to your story, because now you are enhancing your conflict and you're extending it down into the moral realm, or I guess up if you're talking about morality. Usually that's something that is quoted as higher than our regular realm. But it is not enough to just have your characters disagree on the theme. If you want to build truly fascinating character dynamics, you should also be moving on to the next step. Consider how other characters expose their weaknesses and strengths. One of the most powerful ways to develop character dynamics is to design interactions where characters unintentionally or maybe intentionally expose each other's vulnerabilities and challenge each other's strengths. When you can get those type of interactions in your story, it pushes characters outside of their comfort zones, forces them to confront their beliefs, insecurities, and limitations. So in our murder mystery example, the detective is committed to truth above all else, as we've established. This means they might be pushing the detective's assistant to really question their own moral convictions. So the assistant is initially very eager to impress at the start of the story. Perhaps they start to feel pressured, their self-doubt begins to surface, and they worry about compromising their own integrity to meet the detective's high expectations. Then if you look at the victim's husband with his very self-serving mentality, this may make the detective incredibly frustrated or impatient, especially because the detective is probably seeing the husband's behavior as morally reprehensible. So this tension then exposes the detective's own struggle to stay objective, and that maybe highlights both the strength of their conviction, but also their potential rigidity, which could be a possible weakness. Then if you look at the wealthy socialite, they could be amplifying the heartbroken lover's inner conflict by manipulating them into hiding secrets, by tempting them maybe with some kind of easier path. Maybe she is forcing the lover to confront their own loyalty to the victim's memory versus their instinct to self-preservation. So again, tying back to the theme. Then the heartbroken lover, again, with their deeply emotional connection to the victim, maybe that actually makes for a bit of vulnerability in the wealthy socialite's armor. Perhaps the lover's genuine grief highlights the socialite's lack of authentic relationships, and so she begins to question the value of her very self-centered choices. I could go on and on with this, right? And maybe in the comments below you could even expand this further. But when characters bring out each other's weaknesses and strengths in this way, you create a web of relationships that feels alive and just constantly evolving. Those interactions reveal new layers of personality and belief that might otherwise stay hidden. And so the character dynamics in your story get hugely deepened, and readers will get so emotionally invested as they try to untangle this complicated web that you've created. So once you've explored how your characters are exposing each other's strengths and weaknesses, the final step is to consider how their relationships evolve. Character relationships should not stay static. As your story progresses, these dynamics should shift in response to the events of the plot, to your character's personal growth, and the deepening conflicts that get explored throughout the story. In fact, I would say that watching a relationship evolve is one of the most satisfying things to experience as a reader. If you think about something like the enemies to lovers trope, right? Which has hugely blown up in the last few years in the young adult space, or even a story where you've got a ragtag group of characters who all initially hate each other, but they're forced to work together, and then they become a kind of found family. You can really see how so many great stories are driven and designed around this idea of evolving relationships. So in our murder mystery example, here's how that might play out. Perhaps the detective and the detective's assistant begin with this mentor and eager student relationship, mentor and apprentice relationship. But as the story progresses, maybe the assistant begins to question the detective's uncompromising dedication to truth, and then tension arises. So by the end, maybe they actually end up on opposite sides and they go separate ways, with the assistant choosing self-preservation over the detective's idealism. Then if you look at the victim's husband, initially at the start of the story, he's just focused on his own gain. He is dismissing everyone else's concerns. He's just out to get the inheritance and to get the case wrapped up as quickly as possible. But maybe as the investigation continues, he is actually really inspired by the detective's idealism, and he realizes that his selfishness has ruined his life It soured his relationship with his wife when she was alive, and this leads to him making an important confession or an important decision which helps the detective solve the case later on. Then perhaps the wealthy socialite is initially manipulating people quite a lot at the start of the story. She's using her influence and her money to sort of place the suspicion on other people. But as secrets get uncovered, she maybe finds herself being forced to be more vulnerable, forced to have to rely on others in unexpected ways, and maybe that leads to possible alliances with people she would have never dared socialize with at the start of the story. Then the heartbroken lover could initially begin the story as a very isolated figure. They're grieving alone. They don't want other people to know that their lover was involved in an affair. But as they interact more with the detective and the other characters, they start to open up. They share the truth maybe about the victim's secrets, and this honesty could strengthen their bonds with the others, or maybe it actually makes them a target for the people who want to keep certain truths hidden, and maybe that actually means that you kill off the heartbroken lover, towards the end of the story to really raise the stakes even further. One of the things you'll see here is that the best characters have lots of interesting layers to them, and we get to unpeel those layers as the story progresses. And if you watch this video over here, you'll learn how to explore the 4 main layers of your characters in a way that makes them feel far more complex, 3-dimensional, and way more interesting to write and read. Keep writing and keep striving.